save the children. How about a woman birthed in hurricanes with a kinetic vision? A person fighting to protect humanity from becoming victims. Have you ever seen a mutant teach his powers in the school? You a vigilante live to be the exception to the rule. These truths flash like every Allen breed of justice is a tool. So equality can find the needed strength to overrule. Remaining on beat like the Hill Street Blues. Copy comics daily as the planet writes the street news. Find Clark and Lewis, investigating leads, collecting clues. Where the Cape Crusader wars corruption from beneath the avenue. So many stories designed to capture you, like a trapper do. Drawn so masterful, they'll dazzle you with skills unimaginable. Like a fanatic. Set his dash wars for the love. Is how we stamp dopeness on the channel. Six Layer #1.
Six layers.
Nobody does it better. Like Denzel in the comic realm, I'm the bone collector. Building with the artifacts, graphics, applying pressure. Using creative talents is how we bring it all together.
Six layers.
Legendary business minds paying homage to the comic book artists, the writers, the vast knowledge shared in all our projects. Trust, we keep it popping. Showing love to our fans, it's your best believe we're never stopping.
Six layers.
And best believe we're never stopping. Building with the legends, copy the hottest comics on the market. The greatest minds dropping mind-boggling stories off there. Keep an imitator's career in a coffin. Six layers.
Yo, welcome to Six Layers, the comic signature show, period. I'm Mike the Six Layer, and for the first time, I'm with Mark the Honorable Villain.
What's up, Mike? What's good?
I'm on cloud nine, because joining us today, we have one of the legends of the game. We have writer Mark Waid with us. But before we chat with Mark, though, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right, let's get started. All right. I can't believe we finally got him here, Mark. I can't believe it. It's been a long time coming. Stash fam, I guarantee you have bought some of this man's work. If Brainiac was a comic book fan, he couldn't face this dude in a battle of comic book knowledge. The only force beating this man is the all-knowing, the all-encompassing titan known as Google. This legend has written classic stories like Kingdom Come, Justice League, Tower of Babel, and Superman Birthright. To many, including myself, he is known as the greatest Flash writer ever. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you the legendary writer, Mark Waid. Yes.
Hold for applause. Okay. Hey, how are you guys today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thank you for joining us. Let's dive right on in. Mark C. got the first question lined up.
So my first question is, how did you land your first gig in comics? What comic book origin story?
I was working two things. I was working as a journalist for some of the trade publications of the day, you know, the newsramas and CBRs when they used to be printed on paper, Amazing Heroes and magazines like that. And so as a matter of that, I would be talking to editors and writers and artists all day long, which helped me cement connections and so forth. And I was also one of those guys who volunteers at conventions to drive professionals back and forth from the airport. So that gave me a chance to make some connections. And from there was an editor at the time at DC named Julius Schwartz. Now, Julie had been at the company since 1944, but more importantly, he was a fan, not of comics, but he was one of the earliest science fiction fans back when the words science fiction, the name science fiction had only been just coined a couple of years earlier. He was a big science fiction fan, and so he understood how important it is to give other fans a break, right? He had a special place in his heart for giving fans their first gig, and so I pitched him a Superman story, like a quick 8-pager. He bought it, greatest day of my life, and then, you know, I sold him a second one that wasn't as good. And then I went into limbo for a while. Like they gave Superman over to John Byrne. There was no chance to do any more Superman stuff. And so I kind of thought, well, I've given it my shot as a writer. But then I got called a few years later to be an editor at DC Comics, and went up there, took the gig for a couple of years. And in doing so, again, I had no aspirations of being a writer. I just assumed I'd be an editor, which is fine. That was kind of my goal. I liked just being part of the creation process. But being an editor up there meant that I read all of these scripts that came across my desk from, you know, Denny O'Neil and John Ostrander and Neil Gaiman and, you know, just everybody who was writing comics. All these scripts came across my desk. And in reading them and working with them, I learned more about writing in those 2 years than I could have in 10 years on my own, right? So when I left staff in '89, I had made connections with Brian Augustine, who was my best friend up there and also the Flash editor. And he gave me a couple of little Flash one-off assignments to do. They worked out okay. And so from there, it snowballed into a career.
Wow. So, but Julie Schwartz gave you your first ever gig, though.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I mean, as a fan,
yeah, man's a legend. Yep.
Okay, so just with that said, I mean, that's a very unique story, and I find that a lot of people that have your type of resume have a very unique entry into the industry. So just out of curiosity, if you were to start your career today, would you know how?
No, I would have the slightest idea how. The thing about breaking into comics is like breaking out of a high-tech prison, which is to say that you do it, and the first thing they do is they find out how you did it, and they just fix it so nobody can ever break out that way again. The same way with breaking into comics. So everybody's story is unique. I do think that the way in these days, as I tell people when they ask, is the beauty of the internet is that it's democratized comics, right? So if you want to be in comics, great, go do comics and put them up on the web. Right, so you're in comics. And that is a genuinely good way to break into the majors if that's one of your goals, because both companies, both DC and Marvel, and then a lot of the other smaller companies, are actively looking at web comics, actively looking at, even if you're just publishing your own stuff on your own site, as long as you're, blasting it out there in social media and you can get other web creators to help promote your stuff and draw some attention to it, editors and publishers are looking at that material, and they will pull you from there if they think it's good. So that's a way in that I didn't have back in the day. So
the internet. So you got it. So this whole world that people hate of shameless self-promotion. That's what you have to
Sadly,
do.
Yes. Sadly, yes.
So Mark, you've blessed us by choosing this medium, but you have been successful in any medium. So why did you choose comics as your primary source of storytelling?
I don't know that I would have been successful in any medium. I think that I chose comics because it was my first love. I mean, that's just it. That's the beauty of comics, is that it's, there's not a huge, excuse me, if you're doing TV, if you're doing movies, if you're doing animation, there's a million notes, there's a million comments, there's a million, things you have to look out for. There's a million voices in the room. And so, if you're lucky, maybe half of what you came to the table with is actually what shows up on screen. Whereas in comics, it's just, me and a writer and editor, and we go. And so what you see is pretty much what I write. And I like that a lot. And I also like the immediacy of it. I like the fact that I do it and just a few weeks later, boom, you're reading it. And I'm getting feedback there. I'm not comfortable with prose. I probably could have cracked it if I'd spent my life trying to do it, but those few times I've taken a swing at it, it's just not for me. I've written a couple of short stories. I wrote the life story of Barry Allen back in the day that was mostly prose with Brian Augustine, and it just doesn't tickle my fancy the same way writing comics does.
So you're a thorough, to the bone comic book head. Is that safe to say? I love it. I love that. Mark, Kingdom Come for most is a once-in-a-lifetime epic story to tell. You've managed to tell several epic stories. So which one of your stories you get the most feedback from fans?
Well, Kingdom Come, first and foremost. I mean, that's the one that's going to be apparently carved on my tombstone. So that's going to be. But beyond that, Superman Birthright, I get a lot of positive feedback on that, which is very nice because that's my favorite thing I ever wrote. I mean, with all due respect to Kingdom Come, Superman Birthright is my love letter to Superman, and it's, it's my heart is just in every page. And so having people come up to me and say, I didn't really get Superman, or I didn't really like Superman, but then I read Superman Birthright and now I understand, and I like the character, that's a huge win for me every time that happens.
Which one of your works affected you the most emotionally, whether it was in the process or in the response from critics?
That's a good question. Emotionally is a big word. So because there's a lot of, feedback from critics that's emotional, that's terrible. But that makes me cry. But I think that maybe let me hang on for a second. I'm just going to look at my shelf of books here for a second. Probably Flash Zero, the Zero issue of Flash. That was written from a real moment. That was written from a real heartfelt moment. There's a moment in that story where Wally West is able to go back to meet his kid self and able to tell him that everything's going to work out, that, you know, he's going through some tough times now, but everything's going to work out. And that came from real life. Not that I traveled in time, but it came from a time a few months before then when I was driving through Alabama, which is where I grew up, and just decided to stop over at this house that I grew up, that I was the same age as Wally was in that story. At that time, just pulled over to the house. Nobody was home. You know, I didn't prowl around or anything, but I remember sitting there, you know, on the hood of my car, just kind of looking at that house and wishing with all my heart that I could just, you know, that 9-year-old Mark Waid was back in the backyard just playing around, and I could walk up to him and tell him that everything he really wants to happen in his life is going to come true.
You're going to make me shed a tear, Mark. You've written classic stories with Superman, The Flash, Spider-Man. And I can see that the through line through all these stories is optimism and hope.
Yep.
Why do you feel hope is needed in comics today?
I think there's two reasons. I mean, I think hope is needed everywhere today. It is. I've lived 61 years, and these are the most catastrophic times in my life. And so hope is needed now more than ever. For me personally, that's the purpose superheroes serve. Superheroes were created in the 30s and 40s to be hopeful, aspirational figures, and to ask more of them, to try to demand that is not the case, but to try to instead impose a lot of other stuff onto these characters that is not hopeful, that is not aspirational. It's an approach. I mean, and it seems to work for some characters, but I don't feel like those the superheroes are the vehicles to tell those kind of stories. I've read a lot of great ones, you know, but I personally cannot bring myself to do that any more than I would use my car to cross the river as opposed to a boat. You know, it's just like it's not built for that, in my mind.
What, Mike?
All right, no, the debate question. That's yours.
Debate question. Okay.
So end this debate. So according to some, the Bronze Age started with Green Lantern 76. When do you think the Bronze Age officially started?
I think that's as good a demarcation as any. There's either that or, I mean, maybe you can make a case for Conan #1. I think that the death of Gwen Stacy is too late in the game.
Yes. Okay.
I think that is, you know, again, as somebody who was living through it at the time and buying those comics off the stands, that's a little late in the game. Green Lantern, Green Arrow 76 really felt like a gigantic, speaking as somebody who was there at the time, that's what felt like a gigantic sea change. Right? What was it? If we're debating, what are the other choices?
You brought them up, man. You brought them up.
That one works for you because Julius Schwartz gave up the reins on Green Lantern. My debate, what I think, is that a few months later from GL 76, I think it's Jimmy Olsen 134. I think that's the start of the Bronze Age.
133, but yeah, I think you're
133.
133.
I'm sorry, Mr. Waid.
That's all right. And again, those were about the same time. I think that's you could make that argument, but the counter I would offer is that was certainly, okay, here you go. That it was certainly, I think that was the demarcation of the beginning of the Bronze Age, but not for DC. I think that was the demarcation, beginning of the Bronze Age for Marvel when Kirby came over to DC. But for DC, I still think of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and also as important as Jack's move over to DC was, when you think of Bronze Age DC Comics, Jack Kirby does not come to mind. Jack Kirby was not he will, I think in most people's minds, he will always be the seminal Marvel character, seminal Marvel creator. And so when I think of Bronze Age DC, yes, there's the New God stuff, but again, it was in such a very small, compressed 2-year period of time that it's not really emblematic of the Bronze Age of DC like a lot of other stuff is.
Man, oh man, just oozing knowledge.
That's me.
You have damn near 30 plus, almost close to pushing 40 years.
40. Almost 40. Next year's 40 years, yeah.
40 years of worth of comic book professional creating experience. What forgotten aspect of comic creation would you like to bring back? Wow.
I mean, I think we're doing pretty good now. I mean, I'm pretty impressed with what we're creating now. And as the royal we of some of the most, some guys in talent, a lot of guys in comics, way more talented than I am, doing some amazing work. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything we need to go back to. I don't think there's anything that's missing from current comics that I think is vital. I think that people still remember, writers still remember, artists still remember that the important part of the story is the people. The important part of the story is the character. The important part of the story is how these characters feel and act and react. The important part of the story is not the plot. The important part of the story is the character.
What about the collaborative process? What about, is it better now in that aspect as well too?
Yeah, I mean, much better. I mean, first off, the internet made it possible for me to collaborate with artists without having to call them up over the phone and get stuff over a fax machine. So there's that. There's also there's been so much, the idea that writer artists, people, guys and ladies who are in the same, who can take on both tasks. That's a lot more prevalent now than it was for me, in my comics and in the world of comics that I grew up in 20, 30 years ago. So that's changed a lot. And so we just communicate more. I mean, collaboration is easier because the internet has made it possible for us to collaborate instantly. I can, every morning, Dan Mora or somebody sends me whatever page he's working on that day, which is not the collaborative process I was used to when I got in. So, yeah.
What's that like, man? Getting pages. Is it like Christmas? Like when you see something like that you written, visualized?
It's certainly, it's the high point of my morning always, is opening, because I'm working on so many different things. There's always pages, and so, I mean, this morning I opened up an email with layouts from Dan Mora and pencils and inks from Emma Lupacino, who's doing Titans, and another artist who I'm working on a project with we haven't announced yet. And that's all just this morning. I mean, I get all that stuff and it's fun. And, they are, as all creative people are, open and interested in feedback, but by and large, I don't have any feedback for them other than, man, this is really good. And not just because it's really good, but also because, and this is the other thing about the collaborative process, if you need to remember as a writer, what takes me an hour to write, a page, say, it takes them a day to draw. So be mindful of that. As a collaborator, I think it's important for me to remember that we're both working on the story and neither of us is more important than the other. And I should be mindful of the fact that it's easy for me to say, I don't like that head. You should redraw that head. Or, maybe I don't like the way you put that panel together. Maybe try that again. Well, that's easy for me to say, but the guy spent 3 hours drawing it. So just be mindful of that.
Wow.
Also, if I were really that good at art, I'd be drawing it myself.
I have a question about Gotham by Gaslight. You're a part of the editorial team for Gotham by Gaslight. You're also part of Elseworlds' most popular title, Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
But during this time, because I hear this a lot, people say that Gotham by Gaslight was the first Elseworlds story, but was the Elseworlds initiative the goal from the beginning during the time of Gotham by Gaslight?
No. It was that retroactively, the first Elseworlds story. It was really just, it grew out of the fact that I was editing a book called Secret Origins back in the day, an anthology book with, by the name you can tell. I mean, we retold the origins of the characters, but we had an annual schedule, an oversized annual schedule. I didn't know what to do with it because we'd already told the origins of the big characters. What do we do with a big annual? And so I pitched out the idea of 4 short stories that were all this, alternate world stuff. What if Superman landed in Russia? I said in 1988, wishing that I had personally taken that idea, let someone else run off with it. What if Wonder Woman came to, American colonial times? What if Batman, existed back in the 100 years ago or whatever? I just threw this idea out and threw it out to my friend Brian Augustine, again, my editor at DC Comics and my best friend. And he called me that night from home saying, I got an idea for a Batman story. I think I know what to do with that Batman story. It's Batman versus Jack the Ripper. And we just jammed on it over the phone all night. I took it in the next day. I pitched it to my boss at that time, Dick Giordano. He loved it. The condition was we do it if we could find the right artist. And as luck would have it, Mike Mignola was walking around the DC offices that day looking for something to do. So Brian and I took him out to lunch, and he was hesitant at first, but we all knew that's, he draws that stuff better than anybody. And so, we were trying to get him involved. He was like, nah. And if you've ever met Mike, or anybody's ever met Mike, I love Mike. I mean, I like him personally. I love his work. He can be a little sort of like, nah. He can be a little, So at first he was like, I don't. But we started talking about the story, and then he started throwing in a couple of ideas because he started to get into it. And before we knew it, by the end of the launch, he was in. And so that solidified the team. Denny O'Neil is the one who came up with the name Elseworlds.
Okay. I got to throw audible in. You mentioned 2 names, Denny O'Neil and Dick Giordano. Just give me one word to describe both of them. Denny O'Neil first.
I mean, supremely talented. That's 2 words, but taught me a lot about writing, taught me a lot about the fact that it's about character, not about plot. And Dick was just the best boss I ever had. I mean, he was running DC editorial at the time. He's the guy who gave us, under his watch, you got Watchmen. Under his watch, you got Dark Knight Returns. Under his watch, you got so many of them. You got George Perez's Wonder Woman. Under his watch, you got so many exciting DC projects. It's just Dick's attitude was he was positive. He was just looking for good comics, and he wasn't a negative person. He was just, if you came to him with a good idea, he would work with you on it, and as opposed to just looking at it and going, he was very supportive of the creative people and of the staff. And so, my favorite moments of the job were just sitting down with Dick and just pitching out stories and listening to him critique or give his 2 cents or, it's just, we had a good relationship. He was the best boss ever.
Every character you put your pen to, you always hit it out of the park. Are there any lesser known characters that you've been itching to tell stories about? Who's left?
I mean, there's just nobody left. Here's how it works for me. It's not like I sit here and think I've got a Plastic Man story somewhere inside me I want to tell someday. It doesn't really work that way. It's more like, I haven't done a Plastic Man story. What would I do with that character? I'm not done, the Metal Men or whatever. What's my take on that? And I sit down and I just think about these characters and generally just write stuff down. It's not even meant for print. It's just like a vomit draft of like, here's my thoughts on these characters. And it starts to shape into something. So I don't know who's left. There's nobody who comes immediately to mind that's like, I can't wait to put this character in World's Finest. But if they're out there, they'll be in World's Finest at one point or another.
Did you use Space Gabby? I'm not sure if you used Space Gabby.
No, but again, I should probably find a place for Space Gabby, but it's not on my list. It's not on my mental list of characters I'd like to tackle someday. It's more at this point, it's more the villains. It's more, I haven't told the story with the Royal Flush Gang, or I haven't told a story with, I haven't really told Catwoman story or whatever. That's kind of what I lean to now, is like, what villain have I not had something to do with?
Last question. I know you're involved in some exciting projects. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want fans to know about?
I definitely want them to check out Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor, which is sort of a bookend to Superman Birthright in a sense. You don't have to read one to read the other, but both of them are very much of the same point of view as to who these characters are. And there's things in Lex Luthor, Death of Lex Luthor, The Last Days of Lex Luthor that are callbacks directly to Superman Birthright. So there's that. If you're digging World's Finest, Superman and Batman at all, I encourage you to check out World's Finest Teen Titans, which is a look back at some of the earlier days and the formative days of the Teen Titans. And like I said, Emma Lupacino, the artist, is just doing amazing work there. Jordi Belair, the colorist, is knocking it out of the park. That's so much fun. And then Shazam. I mean, working with the Big Red Cheese, working with Captain, we can't say his full name. That's a ball, and that's also with Dan Mora, who's doing World's Finest with me. So and then there's stuff that's upcoming that we haven't announced yet, but that's a pretty full slate for the time being.
When we ask questions about future projects, there's a lot of mumness that happens with that. Even you guys can't even say who your collaborators are either. Like, oh, I'm working with Frank Miller in a year. You can't even say that.
I can't. They get cranky about it when you do that. And sometimes to tell, like if one of the books is if I told you who I was working with, you would be able to deduce pretty quickly what the character is and what the project is, because it's something that he's talked about in the past, that he's known for, that I'm known for. So
wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't wait. Okay, that makes me excited. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a bucket list interview for me and Mark. I've been praying that you joined us this year. This was actually something that I wrote on my wish list this year, and I can't believe it's happening. So thank you. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is the Six Layers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark, the Honorable Villain, and Mark Waid. We are out. Peace.
Six Layers.